Good day, everyone. Good day, and good day especially for Ma'am Sayari. So I am one of the member of Group 7, and we will be reporting the Chapter 7 of the Winning the Water War, or the interactions between economic policies and institutions in water allocation and use, theory and evidence from Philippine Watershed. So, and the other topics or the subtopics of this chapter will be discussed by my other member. They are Mabunga Jiazel, Magnaye Kimberly, Lucena Ruel, Redillas Lance, and Salvador Kennedy Resty. So the first part will be the introduction of the chapter 7. Next slide, please. All right, thank you. For the introduction, the current Philippines water policy just recognized the relevance and importance of a watershed based approach to water resources management. The lack of the actions for this policy resulted the watershed degradation, especially when it comes in economic development. So if they focused on the economic policies over the watershed management, and unbalanced water management can cause the water degradation in community or society. So the possible easy or convenient policy for the water management and their likely effects are conditioned by this factor. So first is the presence of policies, especially for those targeting agricultural development. And the third one contributes an additional layer of complexity. And since this can distort private incentives concerning the use of water, land, and other resources. The particular goal of this chapter is to uncover the water allocation effects of the government policies that are not necessarily aimed at watershed management. So, for example, at the trade industry and the agricultural pricing in the community or in the certain community. And also, according to the municipality, under study provides empathic support for two arguments. And if there's an imbalance between the economic policies and the watershed management, it can cause an argument. First is the natural resource base of a watershed is undergoing degradation with potentially serious consequences, especially when it comes in the water quantity and quality of the society. So the second argument could be the degradation can be attributed directly or indirectly to the spread of intensive agriculture system based on the corn and vegetable and other food without the concurrent adoption or of appropriate measures for the prevention of soil erosion and land quality deterioration. So next slide, please. The next one is the Ursula and the Danilo meet goals and hopes, the simple economics of water ownership, valuation, allocation. Sorry. So water management strategies must try to unbalance all the complexities of the hydrology, chemistry, economics, politics, and institutions. So by balancing all these complexities, the water or the other material could not be experienced the shortage in the community or society. And also, this requires as a foundation a firm understanding of how agents interact when competing for water. Also, this section explores the allocation of water between agents when property rights do not exist or not enforced for this purpose, and a number of strong simplifications to expose the basic economic relationships and identify criteria for the design of policy and hereby adopted. So thank you. And the next topic would be discussed by Lance Redillas.
Good evening. I would like to present the model. Assume a watershed with two farmers. Ursula lives and farms upstream while Danilo does so downstream. Each farmer produces crops using land, labor, and water. Assume for now that this is the only use of water. Of course, the exposition can easily include each farmhouse non-agricultural water consumption needs, but this will only take the model more complicated without necessarily generating additional insights. The quantity of water each would like to use is determined by how much land each wants to irrigate and what types of crops each wants to grow. Next slide, please.
Good
Next
evening,
slide po.
everyone. Good evening. My part is about property rights, demand, and valuation. Under that topic is abundant supply and unlimited demand. When you're just starting a pursuit that involves water, like our farmers Ursula and Danilo, there is abundant water for all. And when one of our resources is abundant, we tend to utilize it to its maximum capacity in connection with the output product's demand. Looking at the marginal benefit curve, the horizontal axis represents water supply, and the vertical axis represents the value of water used by Ursula and Danilo. Meaning, when you're using substantial amounts of water because there is high demand for your product, the less valuable water will be, and vice versa. Next slide, please. For demand growth and competition for water, we will use farming as an example once again. And with that said, once Ursula and Danilo's farming activities expand, the abundant water supply they had from the beginning will prove to be insufficient for them both. Hence, a competition for water will ensue. Next is the effects of an output price change. As per the law of supply and demand, a price change is an effect when the supply or the demand changes. When supply increases while the demand is the same, the output price falls and vice versa. When the demand increases while supply remains the same, the price for the output increases. For example, with our farmer's case, let's say Ursula uses water to irrigate vegetables while Danilo uses it to irrigate rice. What if one day suddenly the demand for vegetables increased? According to our law of supply and demand, when the demand increases while supply is the same, the price of the output increases. Ursula will take this opportunity to expand her production to get the maximum benefit and increase her water usage. But since both of their water supply is the same, Danilo will have to cut back on his part of the production. If he wants to expand his activities, he's gonna have to pay a higher price for his water supply. Next slide, please. Externalities and corrective measures. Externality, by definition, is a side effect or a consequence of an industrial or commercial activity that affects other parties without this being reflected in the cost of the goods or services involved. For example, Ursula's farm is upstream while Danilo's farm is downstream. If Ursula's activities result to water degradation, may it be because of soil erosion or agricultural chemicals, Danilo will have to pay for additional cost for water treatment, and this cost will reduce from his profits. As for the solution, there are three types of measures we can use: curative measure, corrective measure, and preventive measure. But in this case, for there to be a curative or preventive measure, we have to be able to pinpoint the problem source. In practical terms, it may be impossible for an agency to identify polluters when there are many upstream farms. So, as a corrective measure, policies are created. The government can act on this either through quantity control, like restricting Ursula's use of water, or through market based instruments, such as tax on water used in polluting activities. With these kinds of policies, Ursula will now have to modify her activities to lessen water degradation, and that will be one less problem for our other farmer, Danilo. That is all for my part. Let's head to the next reporter. Thank you.
Okay, so my it's all about supply shock. Supply shock is an unexpected event that suddenly changes the supply of a commodity, resulting in an unforeseen changes. So these are the cause of supply shock. So number one is the deforestation and loss of watershed function. So the deforestation, land clearing, and land degradation in upper watershed areas all reduce absorptive capacity, increasing the probability of flash floods and mudslides. So in dry seasons, also the probability of reduced or zero stream flow. So the deforestation is the act of clearing forested area, and the effects of water usage and production and supply are just as important as the effects of supply shocks on allocation mechanism. So here in the Philippines, floods and mudslides are common after heavy rains events like an elevated area. So, and these disasters can often result in property destruction, loss of life due to watershed degradation, or which is the loss of watershed function. So next causes of the stream flow variation, flood and drought. So the volume of water that travels across a given spot during a set period of time is known as a stream flow or discharge. So drought or sa Tagalog is tagtuyot. So the degradation of watersheds cause environmental problem and droughts and floods. So this figure shown by a pair of probability distribution functions. So the bell curve, so representing the probability that flows of a given magnitude will occur in any period. So the narrower bell curve indicates little variation in stream flow, while the wider one indicates stream flow that is more prone to extremes of drought or flood. Next, distributive and welfare consideration. So all the non-market remedies for water management discussed so far have one thing in common. They impose penalties of one kind or another on the upstream farmer. This may be environmentally up, but one must remember that with the exception of some large-scale commercial plantation, most upland farming in the Philippines is carried out by extremely poor people. So the taxes and quotas on Ursula's activities will therefore tend to worsen poverty and increase inequality even as they increase aggregate welfare. So this welfare shows that market-based instruments are better to quotas or other regulatory measures because the latter not only compensate the poor for their sacrifice, but they also not create revenue that could be used to pay a compensation plan. So a rising body of policy research examines practical ways to recompense upland poor for the care of forest soils and water. Next, coordination of policies and institutional reforms. So all proposals for direct policies to alter upland water users' behavior, regardless of whether they involve taxation on the polluter pays principle or compensation on the alternative principle of reward preservers until the need for incentive compatibility. So direct taxes must be linked to the use of resources in question. Otherwise, they will have no more impact on behavior than a lump sum tax or a transfer payment. So as a result, tying rewards to behavior necessitates tax to the upland community's property or use rights over natural resources. Here in the Philippines, the current law asserts ownership of all water resources and then concede water rights for specific purposes by specific users. So that's all of my part. Next, please.
For the Philippine policies affecting upland farms, there are three factors that contribute to the rapid agricultural growth in the Philippines uplands, and these are the following. First, the population growth and migration due to low rates of job creation, which is referred to Cruz and Francisco 1993. Referred to Cruz and Francisco 1993 that in the 1960s and 1980s, upland population growth rates were much higher than the national average due to low rates job development in non-agricultural industries and lowland agriculture, which was followed accompanied by fast expansion of farmed upland land or the cultivated upland land. Second is referred to our minimally controlled access to forest and forest margin areas for conversion has been a substantial source of environmental issues because once a significant portion of the uplands with steep slopes is cleared of permanent vegetation cover, it becomes prone or vulnerable to severe land degradation or erosion. It is It stated also that the shifting cultivation systems traditionally practiced by indigenous communities were environmentally sustainable in the past, but increased population pressure in uplands has reduced fallow periods. And the more intensive farming practices of new immigrants to the uplands, the more soil erosion or degradation will occur, which is referred to FMB 1998, that the recent estimates suggest that between 74 and 81 million tons of soil are lost annually through erosion from upland farmlands, and between 63 and 77% of the country's total land area is affected by erosion. Next slide po. Next slide po. And lastly is the agricultural development policies that provides incentives for upland farmers to intensify land use by planting vegetables and corn rather than perennials or agroforestry crops. That referred to David 2003 that the commercial agriculture has recently developed, corn and the vegetables have rapidly overtaken traditional farmland uses such as coffee and abaca. It means that the traditional farmland occupied with the perennial crops such as coffee and abaca were replaced by corn and vegetables. And as corn and vegetable growers competed with imports and benefited subsidies on fertilizer and agricultural chemicals were steadily increasing. Referred also to Pago Lion 1998, David 2003, that the protection rate to cereal producers has steadily increasing. Corn producers benefited the most from trade policy trends with the effective protective rate crop rising from near zero in the late 1960s to more than 70% in the 1990s and more than 90% by the decade's end. In the figure shown, we can see that there's an increase in the protection rates for corn in the Philippines year 1990 to 2000. And since corn is grown very widely in uplands, increased protection led to an intensified use of upland land and also had a direct and negative impact on environment. Not only corn has an increase of protection rate, but also vegetable crops, which is referred to Chuponko 2003B, David 2003. Due to this policy trend, water resources are being affected particularly by high rates of protection for upland crops and the maintenance of high rates of water-intensive vegetables. As perennial crops and forest cover are lost to allow the growth of seasonal crops, supply decreases and becomes more variable. As a result, water retention capacity in upper watershed areas is reduced, and runoff of water, soil, agricultural chemicals, and various types of or forms of waste increases. And one of the examples for this upland agricultural growth in the Philippines is the municipality of Lantapan in Bukidnon province. Next slide po. Agriculture, okay na po. Agricultural growth, stream flow, and water quality in Lantapan, Bukidnon. The stream flow and the water quality in Lantapan is in the chapter 8. So the agricultural growth in Lantapan, Bukidnon. Those three factors were experienced in the municipality of Lantapan. Large areas of forest were converted to farmland because there were few limits on the availability of land for farming, and much of the municipality was classed as public land. As we can see here in figure 7 and 8, that shown the Lantapan's land distribution in 1973 and 1994, referred to Libin 1994. And according to remote sensing data, the area allocated to primary forest decreased from 52% to 29% of total municipal area between 1974 and 1994, while the area allotted to corn or corn-based farming systems increased from 28% to 49%. Let's reason much much faster than the national average in post-war years. The municipality's growth rate was more than 50% above the national rate through the 1970s and 1980s. Estimates of population growth rates in the upper watershed suggest that it peaked at nearly 5% in the 80s, as shown in Table 1. The farming system also has experienced a major change from coffee, abaca, and other untransported goods to large-scale corn and vegetables, as shown in Table 2. This flat level data show that in the past decade, the area planted to crops other than corn and vegetables by upper watershed farmers has halved as a percentage of planted area. And this agricultural growth and upland agricultural development without an adequate soil management has environmental consequences such as degrade water quality and create health, health problems to farm families and those living downstream. Water pollution in the lower parts of the municipality downstream reflect high soil and bacterial loadings, complete drought in some rivers during extended periods of low rainfall, and flash floods in the streams passing through more intensively farmed areas. And for the conclusion and implications, it will be discussed by the next report.
Good day, ma'am. So, in conclusion, Chapter 7 focuses on the simple economics of competition for water by users located along a river. It emphasizes the difference in the valuation of water between users, finding inefficiency in water allocation, and can be improved through appropriate interventions. At the same time, water valuation and water allocation can also be influenced by policies not on the water use but other targets such as agricultural development. The implication of this finding is that the design of water policy must take account of the broader economic policy environment. Another is the theoretical model. It highlights the interaction of water policies and distributional concerns. If upstream water users are generally poorer, then the population of large policy design must allow for distributional and poverty effects. Next slide. So yeah, these theoretical results were then augmented by the data that contribute to the building of a causal chain from policies and institutions to water allocation outcomes. First, agricultural development policies have strongly favored expansion of agricultural in uplands and the production of seasonal rather than perennial crops by upland farmers. Second is institutional failures that leads to lack of well-enforced property rights in land and water, which results in excessive expansion of agricultural lands and leads to watershed degradation. So uh, this second point is critical because some of our farmers thought that uh, adding lands to their properties may bring fortune, but they have this limited information about about their watershed. So their source of water. So in the long run, having a land area or bigger land area may soon cause watershed degradation because uh, uh, property rights in that area is not that managed. So lastly, the data gathered by farmers for long-term analysis is solely based on national markets, resulting to land use patterns strongly correlating to the land use intensity and degradation of measures of watershed function. Next slide. Fixing water allocation mechanisms is even more difficult in understanding them, especially with the political exigencies that constraints and further development of land use and watersheds. Nevertheless, building an understanding of the interactions of economic incentives, policies, and institutions is an important step toward the building of policy coalitions whose common interests are served by concerted action. It is hoped that this chapter has contributed to that understanding. Thank you, ma'am.